Pockets, I didn't know that. Okay, so I got a hook thing in my book. Well, I hope you all are doing well this morning. I got a new toy. That other one kept sliding down. So is this too loud? Not loud enough? Y'all, okay. I was trying to adjust it the other day, so it's been an ordeal trying to. That other one again, the mouthpiece kept sliding, and I might have noticed during the sermons I have to keep pushing it up, So we bought this one, and then it wasn't compatible with that system. It wouldn't work. We had to figure something else out and order another piece, and it finally came in. And so now it's working. So hopefully this headset will do better than the other one did. I hope so. But it seemed like to me it was louder. It's louder than the other.
It is a little bit, but it's good.
Okay, so I didn't want to be deafening, but I want to make sure everybody could hear. So hear all right back there, John? Yeah. All right. Where's Julie at this morning? Did you? Well, sometimes you got to do that.
Should be here really long.
Okay, all right. Keisha's still recovering from COVID, so she told me she did test negative, but she's still not feeling too good. So the doctor told her she might want to stay home still for a couple of days. So she's hoping she'll be here Wednesday. That's why she's not here this morning. She said she was worried that if she infected somebody else, she'd feel really bad about that. So that's where she's at. So let's continue to pray for her. All right, if you guys would be turning in your Bibles to Matthew chapter 18, ready to start a new chapter this morning. Matthew chapter 18. And so we see here in the first 10 verses, first passage that we're going to look at. I want you to turn there to Matthew 18 and just kind of hold your thumb there, your marker there. Turn over to Mark chapter 9, because I want to give a little background. We're going to be reading here. So what we see in these first 10 verses of Matthew chapter 8, this is a lesson that Jesus gives to his apostles about true servanthood. What it really means to be a servant, which is what every Christian should be. And so the kind of the background to this, the disciples, they had been arguing amongst themselves over who was going to be the greatest. I'm going to be in a better position than you. No, you're not going to be. I'm going to be there. That's what they were fussing about. And they've been on the road to Capernaum, and they were arguing about this. Of course, not to Jesus, but Jesus knew what they were doing. So they were trying to kind of hide it from him, but eventually they're just going to come out and ask him about this. But he knew what they were doing. So look at Mark chapter 9. Let's begin in verse 33. The Bible says, and he came to Capernaum, and being in the house, he asked them, what was it that you disputed among yourselves by the way? In other words, we were going down the road, we were headed to Capernaum. What were you guys arguing about back there? Now, did Jesus really ask this question because he didn't know? He knew, so why is he asking the question? He wanted to think about it and get it out in the open, right? So yeah, he knew. So he wasn't asking if he didn't know. But he wants to confront them with it. So what were we talking about back there? We were walking down the road. Verse 34, but they held their peace. So at first they didn't want to tell him. For by the way, they had disputed among themselves who should be the greatest. And he sat down and called the 12 and saith unto them, if any man desire to be first, the same shall be last of all and servant of all. Okay, so this is kind of the background of what we're going to read here in Matthew chapter 18. So they're still thinking, when they're arguing, well, who's going to be the greatest? Who's going to be the greatest? They're still thinking that Jesus' kingdom is going to be what? It's an earthly kingdom, right? So it's almost like politicians, and we all know who the president is, but everybody else is jockeying for position to be vice president. Right? Who's going to be next in line? Who's going to be closest to the Lord? We all know he's the top dog, but I want to be number 2. And that's really what they're arguing about who deserves to be the second highest ranking person in this earthly government, which there's going to be no such thing. That's still what they're thinking. So let's read Matthew chapter 18. We're going to read the first 10 verses and see how Jesus deals with this. So beginning in verse 1, at the same time came the disciples unto Jesus, saying, who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? So eventually they're all going to ask him a question. And Jesus called a little child unto him, and set him in the midst of them, and said, verily I say unto you, except ye be converted, and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever therefore shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoso shall receive one such little child in my name receiveth me. But whoso shall offend one of these little ones which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged around his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must needs be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. Wherefore, if thy hand or thy foot offend thee, cut them off, and cast them from thee. It is better for thee to enter into life halt or maimed, rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet, to be cast into everlasting fire. And if thine eye offend thee, pluck it out, and cast it from thee. It is better for thee to enter into life with 1 eye, rather than having 2 eyes, to be cast into hellfire. Take heed that ye despise not one of these little ones, for I say unto you, that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father, which is in heaven. Yes.
Before you start, can you imagine that young child sitting there listening to that? Jesus going to the side. Can you imagine that child hearing that?
Yeah, would have been amazing, wouldn't it? Oh, to be that little child.
The innocent children. And for them to hear that and using him as an example
Of the way we should be. Right? And the key word there, as you just said, the innocent child, because we're going to deal with that in just a minute, right? So, yeah, but it must have been something to have been that child. And also to be the apostles sitting in a circle around. And Jesus is really kind of chastising them. You guys are so worried about who's going to be the big cheese here. You need to be taken down some. You need to be like this child here. And so most of us as adults, we don't want to be compared to children, right? We take that as an insult that, well, you need to be like a little child. So you're saying that this kid is, because again, they were just talking about who's going to be the greatest. So Jesus is saying, you're telling us that this little kid is greater than we are? Yeah, that's what I'm telling you. Well, that's kind of takes you back a little bit, because you need to be like this child. He doesn't need to be like you. You need to be like him. Right? And so it must have been kind of a shock to their system, but obviously it's a message they needed to hear. It's a message that you and I need to hear as well. So we're going to come back to that innocent thought here in just a second. So one of the things that we want to point out here when he's saying you need to be like this child, you got to know a little bit about the first century culture, which the apostles would have understood completely what Jesus is telling here. And, and this is probably somewhat true in our culture as well, but to be a child was considered to be humble, because little children, and that would be true today, that they don't have much standing in society. So they're not running the show, they're not in charge, they're kind of at the bottom of the totem pole. But especially in the first century, childhood was associated with humility, being humble, know your place, that sort of thing. You're pretty insignificant. Like I said, you don't have any social standing. And so Jesus is saying, you need to be more like that than what you're fussing and fighting over about who's going to be the greatest. Okay, and so he says there in verse 3, an interesting phrase here. He says, except you be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Okay, so converted here, we typically think of that word if we say, well, I'm studying with my neighbor, I'm trying to convert him. How do we see that? Changing, okay, to be what? Trying to make him become a Christian. Well, he's telling the apostles to be converted, but they're already followers of Jesus. So is that what he's talking about? Converted to their way of thinking, right? To be like little child. You need to adjust your thinking. Instead of focusing on who's going to be the greatest, you need to be thinking about who can be the best servant. So that's what the word converted here. He's not talking about you need to become a Christian, which is usually what we mean. We're trying to convert somebody. He's trying to convert or change their way of thinking. To don't be so arrogant, you need to be humble. Think about how you can serve everybody else rather than thinking about how you can get to the top. Okay, that's what he's trying to get them to understand. Okay, now here's the other thing that we want to notice here. When he says, because unless you're like this little child, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. So he's saying that this little child, if that child were to die at that moment, or the world were to come to an end, which it would because Jesus is still here the first time, so obviously it wouldn't be his second coming. But if that child's life were to end right then, what would happen? You go to heaven. Okay? He's going to be in paradise. So what does that tell us about little children? Marie summed it up right. Children are innocent. Okay? So what doctrine, I mean, this verse right here is really all you need, but there's other ones too. What doctrine does that refute? We talked about it in sermon. Infant baptism, which some people still teach. They talk about original sin. Well, we inherited the sin of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. And so we are, the moment we come out of the womb, we are sinners. We are born sinners. And so if a baby is born and then dies 2 days later, what happens to that child?
It won't go to paradise.
Go to torment, right? Because the child's a sinner. Well, that this verse and others proves that's false. Because Jesus is saying, the only way you're going to get to heaven is to be like this little kid. Because the little kid is innocent. Now, there comes a point where you're no longer innocent anymore. When is that point exactly? Age of accountability, right? Is that age 10 or age 12 or?
When it gets older,
right.
Like some kids, 15 years old, don't know as much as some of them in 6th grade.
Right.
And this is what so important. This is how the Bible says that your sins have separated you from God. And that's at that point when you become the age of accountability.
Right.
But it might be 8, 10, 12, whatever. But now Jesus was 12 years old. And a lot of people think, well, that's when a child becomes age of accountability. That's not necessarily true. I've talked to adults that don't know anything about the Bible, but they know that they're sinning.
Yeah.
Even without reading the Bible, they know that they're sinning and doing what they shouldn't do. But now a child don't have that ability to reason. It's not old enough to reason that out that what he's doing might be a sin.
Right.
Sister said something about Jesus being 12 years old.
Well, that's when he was teaching, and his parents left, and they noticed he wasn't there, and they went back, yeah, where do you think I'd be? I'm about my father's business, right? So he was about 12 years old, but he was already teaching people in the temple. Yeah, and they were amazed at his wisdom for a 12-year-old kid, right? So I know, yeah, when I grew up in the Episcopal church, that's when we were baptized. We were all baptized at age 12. So it didn't matter about how much Bible knowledge or how little Bible. It was at 12 years old, you will be baptized, which for them was not for the remission of sins. It was to be what they called confirmed into the Episcopal church. So they had it all wrong. It had nothing to do with my sins. It had nothing to do with my level of understanding or my maturity level. For them, it was age 12, and I didn't know at the time, but I think that's where they got that. They thought, well, Jesus, when he was 12, he was in the temple, so we're going to just baptize all our kids at age 12 regardless. Okay, the Bible doesn't teach that. It's the age of accountability. What age is that? It varies. I think Joanne said that a while ago. It varies from person to person. Some people mature quicker because let's take a look at, again, why would you need to be baptized? Well, when you have sinned, God calls sin, what is it? What's God's definition of sin?
Transgression of the law.
Transgression of the law. Whose law? God's law, right? So, in order to do that, in other words, God is saying that is a willful act that I've chosen. I know what the law is, but I'm going to disobey it. What if you have no comprehension of the law? Then you're not violating it, right? You don't even know there is a law, right? And so little children are incapable of, they might do something wrong, but they don't even know it's wrong. They don't understand it. And that's why God is saying, when you figure out, and that age varies, but when you figure out there is a difference between right and wrong, and you know what that difference is, and then you cross over that line, you've reached the age of accountability. When you don't understand that there's a line you cannot cross, you're not to that point yet, and God's not going to hold you accountable. You're still innocent. So I've often given the example. Let's say that I left some money on this table, some quarters, and a little child came in here, crawling in here, maybe a toddler that could just barely walk, and they take that money. Are they a thief? No, because they don't understand, right? A little bitty kid, if they do anything with that quarter, they're probably going to eat it. They don't know that it's money, right? So if I came in, and so Chester had left some money here, and I came in and I took it, there's a difference, right? Because I know that's not my money. I didn't lay that money there. Therefore, I have no right to take it. So if I do take it, I'm a thief because I understand the concept of ownership, and I also understand this thing has value right here. To a little kid, it's just a shiny object. They don't know that it has any value. They're likely to pick that up just like they would pick up a spoon or stick it in. Oh, look, this is shiny. I like that. And they don't know what it is. So they're not accountable yet. And that's what Jesus is saying here. You got to be like a little kid. All little kids, if they die, they're going to go to heaven because they're innocent. They haven't reached that age of accountability. So this verse, among others, disproves this idea that we've got to be baptized as soon as we're born, or because we're born lost. Jesus is saying, no, you're not born in a lost condition. You only become lost when you understand God's law and you choose to violate it. Then you're a sinner. But the little kid taking the money is not a sinner because he doesn't even understand. He doesn't know what sin is or what it means. And he doesn't know the money has value, all those kind of things. Okay, so this is one of those verses I think that really clearly refutes this doctrine of infant baptism and original sin and all those kind of things. Okay, all right. So moving on, looking at verse 4. Jesus again goes on with this idea of you need to humble yourself like a child, and the same is the greatest in the kingdom. You want to be great in the kingdom of heaven, you humble yourself like this. So the person that is the most humble is going to be the greatest, not what you guys are talking about, whoever's the most arrogant, whoever is muscling his way in. That's not going to be the greatest. You've got to be humble. You've got to be seeking to serve, not seeking to elevate. By seeking to serve, that is going to elevate you. That's what he's trying to get them to understand. So the lesson for us is the same lesson, right? Don't be self-seeking. Don't do things to glorify ourselves. Don't do things to promote ourselves. And this doesn't mean that, well, if I've got a job in the corporate world and and I'd like to get a promotion, and I'd like to get a raise. Is that okay? Well, sure it is. God is not saying here that you can't do anything to better yourself. That's not the point. The point is all in our mind, our attitude, and especially in spiritual matters. We are not to elevate ourselves in spiritual matters. If I'm trying to, get a promotion at work so I can better take care of my family, well that's fine. Okay, but he's saying don't think too highly of ourselves, especially in the spiritual sense, where I serve God a lot more than you do, so God's got to love me more than you love you. That kind of attitude, not to have that. Okay, humble ourselves. I'm just a humble servant for Christ. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm not doing it for personal accolades or so I can become rich and famous, or I'm just, like a lot of these TV preachers, they're clearly in it for the money. That's not the reason we should be doing this. They want the spotlight on them. We should not seek out the spotlight. Now, if somebody else wants to put it on us, that's one thing, but we don't seek that out. We don't want that. We're not looking for that. Be humble and seek to serve others. Be childlike in our hearts. Have that innocence in our hearts. And so the idea here is, if we don't have that, if that's not our mindset, this mindset of humility, not only will we not be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? In the kingdom of heaven, here he is referring to heaven. He's not, sometimes we talk about the kingdom means the church, not in this context. He's talking about eternal heaven. Not only will we not be the greatest, what does that mean? Yeah, I won't even be in heaven at all. Not only am I not going to be the greatest in heaven, I won't even be there. I'm going to be in the other place, which I don't want to go. That's where all the arrogant people are going to be. That's where all the self-righteous people are going to be that think they're so awesome and I'm better than you are, that type of thing. Well, they're all going to wind up in that place that we don't want to wind up. Okay? So that's what Jesus is trying to get them to understand. You're worried about who's going to be the greatest. You better be worried about just getting there at home. And who seeks to be the least, who seeks to be the best servant of you, that's who's going to be great. He's trying to get them to understand that. Then we notice in verse 5, Jesus here goes to a little bit of figurative or symbolic. And whoso shall receive one such little child in my name receiveth me. And then in verse 6, who shall offend one of these little ones, here's the key, which believe in me. So these verses here, he's talking about, no longer talking about a little child necessarily. What's he now talking about? Yeah, a child of God, right? Somebody, when he says who believes in. So once again, little infants, they don't understand the whole concept of God and Jesus and all that. But he's talking about now children of God, people who believe in him. Okay? So he's referring here to a disciple of Jesus. So Jesus saying, whoever receives a disciple of mine, what's he doing? If you receive one of my disciples, then you are also receiving me. Right. So he said, you receive my disciples, you are really receiving me. So you need to be focused on that kind of thing. Okay. Now, look at, this is interesting here. The latter part of verse 6 and going into verse 7, Jesus said, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Now, this is really interesting because this was something they would have well understood. We can still understand it reasonably well, even in our time period, but especially in the first century, they would have exactly got what Jesus was talking about here. So a millstone was literally, it was a big stone. It was a huge rock or stone that usually weighed several hundred pounds. Okay, so it wasn't a rock that you could easily pick up. This is a big thing. And so they used it to crush grain. And that's why it's called a millstone. They use it like in a mill to process the grain. They would use this, have a machinery apparatus and use this thing to crush the grain. Okay, now, the reason Jesus mentions this specifically, because he knew it would get their attention. And go, if you don't have the attitude of a little child, and if you reject, he's also talking to other people at this point, if you reject my disciples, those that do have the proper attitude, then it would have been better for you to have this 200-pound boulder hung around your neck and somebody throw you into the ocean and you're going to drown. Now, the reason Jesus uses that specific example is because this was a punishment that several of the societies in the Middle East at that time, they actually did this to people. That they would, as a punishment for whatever crime they committed, they would literally tie them to a millstone out on a ship, and then they would push the millstone overboard, and of course it would drag the person down, and it would drown them. So the Syrians did this, the Greeks did this, and we have some historical records that from time to time, even the Jews themselves did this. They would tie a millstone to somebody and execute them in that fashion. So it was just think about it. There's all kinds of ways to die, but what do you think about drowning? Would that be a pleasant way to go? Sucking all that water into your lungs. And I mean, it's got to be one of the worst ways to die. It's a horrible way to go. Need air, and all you can get is water, and it fills you. So this was a horrible punishment. And Jesus is saying, if you don't have the right attitude, you'd be better off going through something like that. So if you understood how horrible that was, you realize how much he's saying, how much more horrible it will be for you if you don't have the right attitude and you don't get to heaven. You think drowning with a millstone is bad, you wind up in hell. Let's see how bad that is. That's kind of the idea. So this would be nothing compared to the torment that awaits you if you don't have the proper attitude. Really trying to warn them and get their attention. Okay? Now, then we go to, it says, in verse 7, woe unto the world because of offenses. Yeah, there's going to be offenses, but woe to that man by whom the offense cometh. Okay, so the word offense here, it's scandalizo is the Greek word, which I think our word scandal comes from. Scandalizo, it means to cause somebody to stumble. Okay, to put an obstacle in somebody's path. That can be literal, or in this case, Jesus is talking about spiritual. If you become an obstacle to somebody else who's trying to live faithful and you cause them to stumble, you're the reason why they stumble. What does he say? Right. Woe to that man by whom the offense comes. So if you commit the offense, you're going to be lost, you're going to be held accountable. But if I'm the one that causes you to do that, what does that mean for me? I'm also going to be held accountable. Okay? We're all accountable for our own sins, but I can also be held accountable if I directly cause somebody else to sin. That's what God is saying. So I have a responsibility not to be a stumbling block to somebody else. If by my conduct, something I say, something I do, causes somebody else to become unfaithful or to question their faith, or if I have any role in that whatsoever, God's going to hold me accountable for that too. And this should be a really humbling passage for us, making us realize how careful we need to be the way we talk around other people, the way we act around other people. And if we do something that we think might have hurt somebody in that way, we need to do everything we can to fix it and make it right. And it's possible we might do that sometime and not even realize it. And that's a scary thought for us. So the idea is be cognizant of your words, your behavior, your actions. We've talked about this before. We think, well, I mean, who's going to pay attention to what I'm doing? Who's watching me? You might be surprised what people are watching, especially people in your family, especially younger people, your children, your grandchildren. We are a big influence on them, whether we want to be or not. I remember, do y'all know who Charles Barkley is? Yeah, he's an NBA, used to be an NBA basketball player. Now he's an announcer on TV or stuff. But I remember he once famously said years ago, he said, I'm not a role model. In other words, well, people don't need to do what I do. They don't need to be watching me anyway. I'm not a role model. Well, he was wrong, because whether he liked it or not, as a pro athlete, did a lot of kids look up to him. Oh yeah, he had a lot of, so he was trying to take it off of him, like, hey, it's not my fault if somebody does what I do. But Jesus is saying, yeah, it kind of is. And he was a person, he's got a huge platform, so he needs to be cognizant of, there's a lot of little kids that are going to emulate me. Maybe I should be really careful about what I say and how I act. But this is true for all of us. We don't have to be a famous athlete. Charles Barkley had a bigger influence because millions of people were fans of his and they paid attention to everything he did. So I might not have an audience of millions, but there's still quite a few people in my orbit that might be influenced either positively or negatively by what I say, what I do, how I behave. I need to be cognizant that Jesus is telling me right here, you better be careful, because if you lead somebody because of something you did, somebody goes down the wrong path, yes, that person will be held accountable because ultimately it's their choice. But if I help them lead to that choice, then I'm also guilty. So we're going to be real careful about that. So I think that's a really important lesson for us here. He's stressing how serious it is if you cause other people to sin. You lead them in that direction. So if they're going to sin, I want to make sure I had nothing to do with it. And in fact, what I should be doing is what? If they're heading in a direction of sin, not only should I not be leading there, what should I be doing? Trying to stop them, trying to talk them out of it, trying to convince them, no, this is not the right thing to do. But I want to make sure I didn't have anything to do with it, with encouraging them to go in the wrong direction. And Jesus says that's a serious offense. Now, then we get to verses 8 and 9, and we've seen this before. Back in Matthew chapter 5, in the Sermon on the Mount, verses 29 and 30, Jesus basically said, we're not going to go back and read that again, but he basically said the same thing. If your hand offends thee, cut it off. If your eye offends thee, pluck it out. So we talked about that before. Is this literal? Jesus saying, I literally need to cut my hand off. No, this is figurative language. Now, there are people like the Muslims, they actually do that. Right? So if you're a thief in the Middle East and you get caught stealing, using your hand, they'll cut your hand off. They actually do that. But Jesus is not saying literally. Hopefully it wouldn't get to that point. But so what is he telling us? It's real bad, right? Anything that leads us to sin, it's not worth it. Okay? If we had to go so far as if my eyes are leading me to sin, I'd be better off, he said, I'd be better off being blind than looking at things I don't need to look at. Or if I was a thief, my hands are stealing things. Well, I'd be better off if I didn't have hands. But the bottom line is, it means you'd be better off not being a thief, or you'd be better off not looking at things that you shouldn't be. Or if I'm out there cussing, I'd be better off to cut my tongue because I'm saying evil things with my tongue. The idea here is that we need to sacrifice for God. We I need to censor I don't need to say bad things. I don't need to do bad things. Okay, because it would be better off, I'd be better off maimed to get to heaven than I would be to be complete and go to heaven. Because I've used my body in sinful ways. So this is what Jesus is saying. We need to give up things. We need to have self-discipline. I could say that, but I'm not going to say it. Okay? I could go to that place, but I'm not going to go there. I could engage in this kind of behavior, but I'm not going to do it because the cost is that's not worth it. That's going to send me to hell. So that's really the image here. He's trying, it's not about a literal cutting off, but it's like anything that causes you to sin, you need to try to cut it off. Get it out of your life. And sometimes that's easier said than done, but that's what we have to do. We know that something, if there's something that, and again, we all have different temptations. What tempts me might not tempt you. But if I know of something, I've talked about this before, like, if I walked into a casino at Las Vegas, is that a problem for me? No, because I have no temptation to gamble. Is that a problem for some people? Oh, yeah. There's no way they'd walk through that room without losing all their money, right? And God told us, be a good steward of the thing. That's why it's sinful to just throw your money away like that, right? So that may not tempt me, but it may tempt some. So somebody that's a real problem for, they need to avoid that casino like a plague. They don't need to go to Las Vegas. They don't need to go to Atlantic. They don't need to go anywhere near any place that would tempt them. That takes self-discipline. It takes sacrifice. If I was tempted by alcohol, that's not a temptation for me either, but it is for a lot of people. I need to stay away as far away from bars as I can. If somebody says, hey, let's go out to eat at one of these restaurants that has a bar, maybe I probably don't need to go there because the whole time we're eating, I'm looking at that bottle of Jack Daniels over there at the bar, and it's really getting to me. So I need to stay away from those places because for me, that's a real stumbling block. It's a temptation. That's the kind of things that Jesus is talking about here. They cut those things out of your life. Stay afloat. So many people, I guess they have the idea that it's like, if you got we used to do this when we were kids. I don't know if y'all were as stupid as we were, but you'd go out camping or somewhere and you'd have a fire there, and kids would dare each other to, see how close you can get your hand to the flame. And it's like, you're trying to see how close I can get to the fire without getting burned. Or the bug, how close can you get to the bug zapper? And they always get zapped. They're attracted to that light and they get. Sin kind of works that way too. We don't need to, let me see how close I can get to that sin without actually, that's really foolish on my part if I'm going to do that. If I know something is a stumbling block for me, I need to cut that out of my life and stay as far away from it as possible. And if I have friends or loved ones that they have those kind of things, what do I need to be doing? Trying to get them to stay away from it, right? I need to encourage it. No, let's not go there. That's not going to be good for you. Let's go here. Do what I can to keep them away from things that I know is a temptation for them. We have a responsibility to try to do that. Ultimately, I can't force them not to do it, but I have a responsibility to try to encourage them. Don't go to that place because that's going to be hard for you. Well, let's go do something. Maurice?
If you want to give an example of sin, give an example of using a sticky pad to catch a mouse.
A sticky pad to catch a mouse. Elaborate.
Okay. Have you ever used them?
To catch a mouse? No.
Have you ever used a sticky pad that they sell to catch mouses?
Oh, I thought you meant like a Post-it note, a sticky pad. That's what I call a sticky pad.
Sticky pad, once you touch it, you do not. You're away from it.
Yeah.
You might as well throw your shoe away.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you want to use that as an example that people might recognize as sin.
Yeah. So thinking that, I can touch this a little, I can do a little bit, but it's not going to be that bad. But once it sticks to you, you can't get it off. Right, and that's the idea, yeah, so Jesus, that's what he means by these things, just get as far away, cut those things out of your life that you know is gonna lead you away from God. And that's, nobody said it'd be easy, I mean, that's why there are temptations, that's something I really want to do. But if I'm concerned about my soul, and I know that's gonna lead me down the drain, I've got to find a way to get away from it, got to. And so that's why he's being extreme, like cut your hand off. That's what it takes. He's trying to get their attention. Like this is how serious this is. Get rid of it, whatever it takes. Make that self-sacrifice to God. All right, and then we get to verse 10, the last verse that we looked at. It says, take heed that you despise not one of these little ones. For I say to you that in heaven their angels do always hold the face of my Father, which is in heaven. So the idea here is no matter how weak a brother or sister in Christ is, we're not to look down on those people. We're to do all we can to help them because we want them to do the same thing for us. Okay? And some people may, like I said, they have different weaknesses. The meaning of that last part of the verse, that's one of those disputed verses where, or the interpretation is disputed. So some people use this to kind of justify the idea of guardian angels, that we have guardian angels, right? Because it says that in heaven, their angels do always hold the faith, right? So they said, well, this is talking about guardian angels watching over these children. Okay, and so just very briefly though, I did a whole series of sermons a year ago or whenever it was about angels. And we talked about this idea of guardian angels. And so real quickly, I'm just going to read a couple of verses because people look at Psalms 91, 11, and 12. Says, for he shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee in all ways. They shall bear up thee up in their hands, lest they dash thy foot against a stone. So primarily that, and then this verse that we just read here, Matthew 18:10. They'll say, we'll see this shows that we have guardian angels. Okay, now the problem with that, you got to look at the context, right? So again, our context here is they're arguing about who's going to be great. Okay, and what Jesus is saying here, he's not saying necessarily that we all have an individual angel that's looking over us. What he's saying is all the angels of heaven are concerned about every single person. So shouldn't we be concerned about every single person, or should we be more worried about ourselves? We should be concerned about everybody, just like the angels in heaven are concerned about the welfare of other people. Okay? Now, something else to notice here again in Matthew 18:10. Notice what it says there, that in heaven their angels behold. So he said the angels are in heaven. Okay, they're not here on earth. And some people say, well, but God is everywhere. God can be in heaven and right here in this room at the same time. Yeah, that's true because that's God. But is that true for angels? Okay, and we look at the time, Daniel 9:21 says, yea, while I was speaking in prayer, even the man Gabriel, who's one of the archangel, whom I had seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, touched me about the time. So Gabriel, this shows us that angels have to move from place to place. They're not like God, that God is just everywhere all the time. Angels have to go from here to there to there. So if angels are in heaven, then where are they not? They're not down here, right? So I think the Bible shows us there's no concept that I have a guardian angel just following me around everywhere, because all the angels are in heaven. They're not down here. Okay? And they would have to move from there to here to do that. And so our questions, as we talked about when I did that sermon, I said, the questions we'd have to ask if it were true that there were guardian angels. Number one, I want to know, well, where's my guardian angel been all the times in my life that I got hurt?
That's a good question.
I mean, what is he on a coffee break? Why was he not doing his job? Because that's their concept. The guardian angel is there to protect you. Well, why didn't he protect me from my own stupidity, right? All the accidents and things in my life, I look back, yeah, it's my fault, but if I got a guardian angel, what was he doing? Why did he take control of the car and not let me run off into the ditch or whatever? Why did he do that? That would be a question we would ask. We would also think about, well, if you got a guardian angel that's kind of controlling these things, doesn't that eliminate my free will? Yes, it does. And God told me I have free will, but if I got a guardian angel driving me in certain directions, that really takes away my freedom of choice. And the Bible teaches that I absolutely have freedom of choice. Right? And then the last thing I would argue is that it also detracts from the sufficiency of the scriptures. God said the scriptures are all we need. So do I need a guardian angel? That would be something in addition to the scriptures. And God says, this, my book, my word, that's all you need. I don't need a guardian angel. But what Jesus, I think, is telling us here, the angels, yeah, they're watching us and they're concerned about us. And so we should be concerned about each other, just like the angels in heaven. That's kind of the message that Jesus is promoting here.
People won't believe in these angels like you see on TV. We don't have angels like that.
Yeah, because that's how do we know? Well, that's not what the Bible teaches, right? It just there's no indication that they come down and take human form. They did, but again, the age of miracles is past, right? There's no indication that they do that in the current age. They did at one time to carry out God's message. They were usually used as messengers to go to God's prophets, but we're past all that. Okay, so everything in the New Testament points to most of they're up in heaven, they're watching us, they're concerned about us, but I don't see anything that says I've got one that's following me around everywhere and you all have one. It's just that doesn't seem to be supported by the Bible. It's a comforting thought. A lot of people like to believe in it, but I just don't think that it's supported by the scriptures. All right, any other questions or comments? All right, the Lord willing, we'll pick it up there with verse 11 next week. So we'll take a break and begin our worship service.